we want to go into Nier instead. Sorry, I messed up the order.
Yeah. So I watched Dark Gathering.
Yes.
Um,
Manga
this is
original, I believe.
a yeah, I think yeah, this is a manga original. This is Studio OLM main production.
Okay.
This is a supernatural horror, quote unquote, series. Um, the staff is a bunch of producers, list being as long as my fucking arm. And then main director is Ikata Hiroshi, who recently did Magical Destroyers.
Okay.
He did Tonikaku Kawaii. What else has he done recently?
Other than like FLCL Progressive, this seems like a pretty okay list from what I'm kind of going, right?
Yeah, he worked on a bit of Princess Principal, it seems.
Uh-huh.
A bit of Flip Flappers, some of the early episodes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Rolling Girls, he's done some stuff for Yu Yu Shiki as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
he's been in the industry for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, obviously, he had a good run of success, in my opinion, with Magical Destroyers.
Yeah.
Script and series composition by Shigeru Murakoshi, who also worked on some similar stuff as the director. He did Shinmai Renkin Jutsushi, which was what the fuck was this? Oh, Management
Management of
of a
a
Novice
novice.
Alchemist.
Yes, yes.
He also worked
That's pretty
on Zombieland Saga Revenge, uh,
Okay.
Taisho Samurai,
Mm-hmm.
um, Kakegurui episodes, Dororo, um,
Yeah, yeah.
stuff like that. So the staff behind this is pretty decent. Um, the main synopsis for this is essentially our main character, Keitaru Gentoga, is a college freshman who is essentially cursed by an evil spirit. Um, and the result of said curse is other spirits are very, he's basically a spirit magnet. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result, he had shut himself in. He became sort of a hikikimori for a few years. But one of his friends, Eiko Hozuki, who's the other sort of lead in this series, sort of pulled him out of that hole and is sort of trying to get him on the path to, being a normal guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I guess he takes a sort of job or a college course or something, and he becomes the tutor of a girl named Yayoi Hozuki, who just so happens to be Eiko's cousin, and she is sort of afflicted with this. Um, I don't know if it's a curse or it's some sort of birth defect, but she has these strange-looking eyes that
The
just so
skulls.
happen to look like skulls. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result of this, each of her eyes has two pupils, right? One of which sees the normal world, and the other of which sees the spirit world, and she's able to
That's the
see.
most Chunibyo shit I've heard in
Yeah,
quite a while.
yeah, it's very toony. And she's able to see both of them at the same time.
Uh-huh.
Um, and the story from there sort of becomes a sort of ghost hunting, ghost of the week kind of series where the main
Is this
character
a
Keitaro
is this
hates
comedy
ghosts.
focus or
So
is
this
this
has this has a comedic sort of bent to it, but it is not
okay?
comedic focus at all.
Okay, okay, okay,
It's
okay.
sort of a drama. It's sort of a ghost hunting thing. It's got a lot of stuff going on, right?
Okay.
Um, but the main, I guess, setup is the main character hates ghosts. He hates spiritual, stuff. because he's been cursed for, years, and it fucked up his life. Um, but Yayoi is super interested in the occult and ghosts, and she's always wants to see, like hunt down ghosts and go to haunted places. Um, and it's revealed later on that the reason she wants to do this is because about a year prior, she had lost both of her parents in a car accident. Um,
Okay.
and due to her, being able to see the spirit realm, after the car accident, she was able to see essentially her mother's spirit get basically kidnapped by some other evil spirit. Um, and her mother's spirit is not able to rest peacefully as it should. So she's been essentially ghost hunting ever since to track down the
Wait,
evil
can you
spirit.
clear this up? So the evil spirit kidnapped her mother's ghost or spirit, I
Yes.
guess? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
I guess like as she died, this evil spirit swooped in
Okay,
and
okay, okay.
and stole her mother's spirit, which
Mhm.
prevented her from being able to, rest peacefully uh,
Okay.
after their funeral or whatever, right? So she's hunting down evil spirits in order to, find this evil spirit that took her mother.
Mhm.
Um, and she wants to stick with the main character because he is a, spirit magnet, right? Like they're just super attracted to him
Yeah.
because of his curse, and her being a super effective ghost hunter,
Mhm.
spirits avoid her, right? Um,
Right.
so they sort of team up, and hijinks ensue. It's relatively episodic. There's a bit of the main overarching plot with the general, um, wanting to hunt down this certain spirit. They're also sort of trying to lift this curse that's on the main character. Um, the curse, by the way, is also fucking disgusting. They sort of go into it in that he has this spirit that's sort of attached to his right arm,
Mhm.
um, and he wears a glove on his right arm. And the reason he wears this glove is because the curse sort of essentially makes it so his nerves like grow outside of his skin.
What the
Um, and he has to like normally get his hand quote unquote exercised, which is literally just them like numbing his arm and essentially cutting off all the nerves. Um, but yeah,
Do they
it's
show that in the anime?
yeah, they show it. It's
Jesus
fucking
Christ.
gross. It's not like bloody or anything. They sort of show it as like these white like strings that are sort of just growing outside of his hand. But
Uh,
it's still really disgusting.
right, right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, uh, it's a pretty interesting series. Like I said, there's a sort of comedic bent to it. A lot of the character interactions are sort of like, like the main dynamic is the main character hates spirits. The little girl loves spirits, and then Aiko, who's sort of like the main character's childhood friend, um, is kind of just like constantly supportive of, wanting to get the main character sort of out into the world, right? So she's constantly sort of pushing him into these scenarios where, they're encountering ghosts and going to these haunted places and whatnot.
So does Aiko go with them a lot, or
Yes,
like?
yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. But she
She
doesn't have any
is
powers, right?
so no, so she doesn't have any like so the main
But
character
she's
can
knowledgeable.
essentially sense ghosts, right? Like he can
Okay.
sense the malevolence of like evil spirits and stuff like that. Um, and Yayoi, the little girl, can obviously see, like physically see ghosts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Eiko can't, like she has no, like she's completely ignorant of whether there's, spirits around or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So she's pretty carefree, but she's also cursed, by the same thing that the main character's cursed by. And the
Aiko.
main character, yeah, Eiko's cursed.
Okay.
Um, so she's also cursed, but it's on both of her hands.
Mm-hmm.
And the main character sort of feels guilty about that,
Mm-hmm.
because I guess whatever. happened to get him cursed, like she sort of got wrapped up in. They don't really go
Mhm.
into it too much yet. Um, but yeah, a lot of it is sort of, um, it's like the character interactions are comedic, and then they sort of get into these um, like haunted situations to where it sort of almost becomes like a supernatural like battle shonen kind of thing.
Mhm.
Where like they're fighting these ghosts or they're hunting down the ghosts or they're running from the ghosts or exercising them in some way, right? Um, and then afterwards it sort of becomes like more serious like character drama with some more introspection about the curses and the character motivations and stuff like that. um, and it balances it pretty well. um, I think the comedy sometimes comes in at sort of awkward times. Like there will be,
Mhm.
some serious character moments, and then it's like time for comedy, and then it's like this didn't really fit um and with this timing, right? Um, but overall, it's pretty decently balanced, I'd say. Um,
Does the
the
main
comedy,
character gain powers like throughout? I mean, like, so like right now, the initial premise is that he's essentially bait for the
yeah,
actual like
he
yeah.
is effectively bait for Yayoi to hunt down the ghost, right? Like she is
Yeah.
like the ghost hunting expert, um, and the main character Keitaro is kind of just there, um, to help her, right?
Mhm.
Um, but as far as I'm aware, he doesn't really gain anything. Um,
Okay, so they don't have any like arcs or where it's like training combat arc to gain this small power to help defend your, that
no,
sort of
so
stuff.
so
Right?
the
It's
only
just
like
okay.
training that he does is sort of like some physical training because the main character's grandmother is like a priestess, like a Shinto priestess or whatever, shrine maiden or
Mm,
whatever. Um, and she has like sort of given him advice that, a strong body makes it harder for a ghost to, possess you, right? Um,
mhm.
so that's pretty much all he's really doing is sort of, exercising and stuff like that. Um, but as far as I'm aware, he's not going to start shooting, ghost beams out of his hand, right? Um,
Mhm.
but that could happen.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
How are the audio visuals in this series?
so they're actually pretty decent. Like I said, it's Studio OLM. Um, I have a feeling there's probably a shitload of subcontractors on
Yeah,
this.
if you just look at
Um,
down, the animation has like like at least like 7+
yeah,
subcontractors.
they're like there's I figure just with the amount of fucking producers involved in this, but
Yeah.
the audio visuals are pretty good. The art style is so the character designs are pretty interesting because the proportions are a bit uh odd, I guess, from something that comes out like in the current year. They feel more um I don't know, like late, like around like the 2010 era.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with some of the bigger like noses and the very big eyes and stuff like that. Which I guess is, from the manga, right?
Mm-hmm.
The color palette is pretty vibrant, um, which is pretty I guess nice because sometimes they do like, when they try to lean into the horror aspect of it, um, you know, I guess they sort of make Yayoi's like purple hair a bit more vibrant, and then they make her eyes glow like a bright red,
Oh,
which
like she's
is
almost getting a buff or something.
yeah, which is it's a nice touch. And then when
Mm-hmm.
it's like not doing the horror stuff, the color palette is, you know, in some of the more serious moments, it's a bit more subdued, but in the more like slice of lifey comedy moments,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like it's sort of reminiscent of like I kind of want to say like a Nisekoi like color palette, but a little bit more like not quite as vibrant. You know what I mean? Um,
Okay.
the hair
Not as much
colors,
pastel colors.
yeah, the hair colors are still very bright. The environments are fairly bright. Um, so it's an interesting contrast between
Mhm.
like the normal slice of life stuff and then the horror aspect. Um, but yeah, it's a pretty charming series. As for like the actual ghost stories, um,
Mhm.
so far they're pretty interesting. So I'm not like super into like Japanese ghost stories,
Right,
right?
right, right.
Um, but I've heard of some of the more famous ones, right? Um, and a lot of the early episodes do seem to be very much like heavily based on pretty famous like Japanese ghost stories, right? Like
What do you mean by a lot of them? Okay.
one of the first like haunted places they go to is this haunted phone booth, right? Where,
Mhm.
you know, the story that the anime sort of presents is that there's this haunted phone booth where this lady got sort of murdered in, right? And
Right.
her like um, vengeful spirit will like if you go into the phone booth, um, like the ghost will basically kill you, right? Um,
Okay.
and there is a fairly famous Japanese ghost story about this, phone booth that's like disconnected. Um, I think they call it like the wind phone or something. It's this disconnected phone booth where you can go into it and you can pick up the phone. And if you listen to it, you can hear like the voices of the deceased, right?
Mhm.
It's a fairly famous like Japanese ghost story. Um, so they sort of took a twist on that, I guess. And then another one of the stories is they go to, the shrine, um, because the main character needs to get his hand like exercised or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And in this shrine, they have um, a collection of haunted Japanese dolls, right? And
Okay.
one of these dolls ends up possessing the main character and sort of uses her hair to attack the main character, right?
Oh, okay, okay.
And this is based off of probably the most what I would see as like the most famous Japanese ghost story, which is the haunted doll that's like it's alleged to have like human hair, right?
Right, right.
And its hair like literally will grow, and it's
Like long
maintained.
black haired. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's actually like there is an actual shrine in Japan that like has this doll, and
Mhm.
there's photos of it and stuff. Um, and apparently it's in one of the basements or whatever, and there are um, like monks and stuff that actually have to maintain this doll's hair,
Mhm.
otherwise its spirit gets angry or whatever.
Mhm.
Um,
So near,
There are also multiple
near, who'd win in a
monsters that
fight?
have so long hair. Sorry, Toast. Go on.
yeah.
So near, who'd win in a fight? The Dybbuk box or that doll?
Um, I don't know. Probably the doll, I guess. I'm not too sure. But yeah, a lot of the ghost stories are sort of based on like Japanese, um, occult stories and creepy stories
Mhm.
and stuff like that. They're not uh like the stories aren't like exactly the same. Like they're very much sort of twists on like these real life stories. Um,
Mhm.
but I imagine if you're like really into Japanese ghost stories, you'll probably catch like pretty much all of these references, um,
Mhm.
which is kind of cool. Um, but I've only kind of delved into like surface level stuff, like some of the more
Yeah,
famous
yeah, yeah.
ones, right? So,
Near,
um,
is Hachishaku-sama in this series? She's
uh,
relatively new, is she not?
I think so. I don't know. I've only watched
The
like five.
eight-foot tall lady.
I think there's like nine out of them out right now. I watched like six of them. Um, the most recent one I watched, I think, was um a pretty obvious riff on Ring, right? Which was they take this college course, which is basically like a ghost class, right? Which is pretty funny. Um, but the professor shows them this tape, right? Uh, which is kind of fucked up actually. Um, where they show this tape of this dude like committing like suicide, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like in the middle of the class, the tape changes from like this like random dude to like the main character, right? It shows like the main character, um, and in the tape, like he lights himself on fire, and then um, like the main character is sort of like cursed with like that, and they sort of have to exorcise the spirit um, before the main character like actually, you know, lights on fire, right? And the way they do that is they exorcise the ghost, like they force the ghost out of the tape into this like straw doll, and then they force the doll to watch like the video itself, so that way like the ghost is essentially like cursed with its own curse, right? Um, but yeah, you know, it's a pretty obvious, you know, riff on Ring, right? Where you watch this tape and, you know, you'll die in 7 days or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, you know, a lot of it's stuff like that. And it's all pretty fun, you know. Like I said, there's a comedic bent to it. It doesn't take itself like super seriously.
But I think the main also kind of attraction to this series is kind of, I guess, both the characters, but how kind of the girl uses the power to kind of interact or fight against the monsters and stuff like that too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
how they get out of sticky situations.
yeah. It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said, not super serious. Um, the characters are all very fun. Their interactions are pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, they have all got some sort of, I guess, trauma or baggage, which leads to some nice character moments and introspection. Um, you know, they've all got this sort of uh, eclectic bent to them, right? Like even Aiko,
Yeah.
who's supposed to be like the normal one of the three, right? She has this sort of almost um, yanderish, like secret obsession with the main
Mm-hmm.
character. Um, and it's revealed later on that, you know, she sort of uses these, um, you know, spooky, haunted, scary ghost situations to, in her mind, like strengthen the main character's like urge to protect her, right? Because, you know,
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
yeah, like she's sort of um, like madly in love with the main character, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't really get into like real like yandere territory. It's sort of like just this comedic kind of thing, at least right
Mm-hmm.
now. I don't know
Yeah.
if it does later on. Um, but yeah, as for voice cast, the main character is voiced by Nobunaga Shimazaki. He's doing a pretty standard, you know, main character voice, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's not really too much to write home about. I mean, he does a uh, good job of it. Yayoi, the girl with the skull eyes, is voiced by Yu Sasahara,
Mm-hmm.
who is not really a newcomer per se, but she's a relatively newer face um, in the voice acting industry.
Yeah.
She recently did, I think one of her most recent main roles was in Shadow's House, right? The blonde girl, Emiliko.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
but
One of the
yeah,
main characters.
and then Eiko is voiced by the one and only Kana Hanazawa, um, who does a pretty good job here. She's sort of doing a
Very
kind of,
standard, run of the mill
yeah, a
kind of
relatively
One-san.
standard like Onesan role.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
she kind of has this sort of clumsy, ditzy airhead bent to it as well,
Uh-huh.
which, you know, Kana is always very good at doing. She's
Mm-hmm.
very good at these clumsy characters, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
she occasionally still tries to dip into the whole like, you know, Kana Hanazawa's attempt at being quote unquote scary or menacing or whatever, which, you know, as we've gone over, she's never really been able to do, right? It's just, you know, Kana
Mm-hmm.
Hanazawa I think is a very flexible voice actor, but
Yeah.
that is just a role that she's never been able to tackle, um, unfortunately. But she
Yeah.
does do it every once in a while in this. It, she's still not very good at it, but you know. everywhere else, she's pretty spot on here. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, the voice cast so far is quite good. For the core cast. Um, yeah, overall, I think this is a pretty good series. It's definitely better than I was expecting.
Hmm.
It helps that it doesn't try to go super hard in like being a horror series. It's sort of just a, Japanese ghost story. Um,
Vibe, but you also have the powers of the characters
yeah,
again trying to get
it,
out of stuff.
yeah, it's
Like,
more of a ghost hunting series than it is
yeah,
a
exactly, exactly,
a
exactly.
ghost haunting series. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Um,
Ghostbusters kind
yeah, so that definitely lends it a lot of I don't know, brownie points. Yeah, I guess.
yeah, it's a little bit more flexible, and it doesn't have because trying to really be like, oh, we're horror, we're really creepy kind of thing, really, I think, sets you up on a higher bar, especially since like, a lot of times, unless you're doing like jump scares, right? Um, you have to go full creepy, right? And again, that's a much harder bar to clear,
Yeah, I think
especially
it.
with stuff like Junji Ito already existing, right?
Yeah, I think if I think in the anime medium, I
Hmm.
don't know if it's just me, but I feel like it's very hard to do horror. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Outside
that's
of just raw body horror or shock value,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's
Jump
very
scares, right?
hard to be like genuinely creepy, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it helps when, a quote unquote horror series has some other aspect to it to sort of, um, lift up what's there, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I think this does that pretty effectively. Um, it's a solid show. I think it's very charming. It does what it wants pretty well. Um, and yeah, I probably recommend it.
Hmm.
Again, if you like Japanese ghost stories or just ghost stories in general, I think there's a lot to like here. Um, if you want just sort of um, a general, I guess, somewhat comedic yet somewhat serious series that has, just relatively likable characters, I think you'll find a lot to like here. Um, Overall, solid. I'd probably rate it maybe 7.5. Maybe, if it develops into something a little bit more, I'd probably bump it up to an 8. Um,
Okay.
but right now, it's just overall solid. Um, I'd recommend it for sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely a little bit more interested in seeing how it develops, and always watching. But um, that was, I think, yeah. I'm glad that you covered this because I honestly didn't know what to make of it because I have a little bit. I don't have like necessarily bias, but I've never been like, oh, I should watch this horror anime. Again, for similar reasons as you just stated, right? It's a little bit
Yeah, I
hard
mean,
to.
like I said, when you see an anime and it's like horror, right?
Yeah, you're like,
uh you kind
okay.
of you kind of get this sort of immediate like bad taste in your mouth. And it really doesn't
Yeah.
help that a lot of anime with the horror genre or subgenre
Mhm.
um try to lean into it really hard in terms of marketing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like even something like what was that other ghost series with girl that's like haunted or whatever, Miracle-chan, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's a comedy series, right, for the most part.
Yeah.
And yet its marketing is still very much like, oh, there's ghosts and it's scary, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
when that's not really what the series is, right?
Mhm.
Um,
And it's like it's good to and it's fine if you have like a comedic horror, but don't be like, oh, it's like Saw or like it's like The Ring or like
yeah,
freaking yeah. Don't set the hurdle to don't overpromise and then underdeliver. A little bit unfortunate, but I'm glad that this series kind of panned out to be pretty good on that front. So again, thank you Nier for helping cover Dark Gathering. This is a manga original that was adapted by OLM Studio OLM as well as a bunch of the however many subcontractors has seems to have pretty good audio visuals and then a pretty good kind of anime structure, I guess, as well. General good storyboarding. pacing. So please do check it out when you have the time.